Okay, I am honoured and delighted this time to introduce and welcome Dr. Nick Walker to the podcast. As usual, I ask guests to introduce themselves in any way that they like. I think I can rant on about people, but sometimes not say the things they want to say about themselves. So, Nick, can I give the podcast over to you for a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, I'll take it. Yes, thanks for having me here. I'm Dr. Nick Walker, and a queer, autistic, trans woman. My pronouns are she, her. I have been involved in autistic community and culture for 2 decades now, uh, been influenced in shaping the discourse that eventually turned into the field of neurodiversity studies, developed a bunch of early foundational work on the neurodiversity paradigm, and lately playing with this set of ideas I call Neuroqueer Theory.
Yeah.
I'm a professor of psychology at California Institute of Integral Studies in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am an aikido teacher and have been since my teens. And I'm also a writer of uh, speculative fiction and comics, including the Weird Luck webcomic, which I expect I'll be talking about more as our conversation goes on.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, I think as I said at the beginning, I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you on the podcast. Your work's been incredibly influential on, on my thinking and lots of people's thinking. And the book Neuroqueer Heresies is something that I frequently recommend to people, to students, and other people thinking in this kind of area. So yeah, I'm really delighted that you're able to join us. And thank you for that bit of background about you. As you said, there's some things, I guess there's some things that you're asked to talk about more frequently than others. And I'm hoping that today's a chance to talk about maybe some of the things you don't talk about quite as much, but we'll see where the conversation goes. Um, so this, as we were saying before we came on, this podcast is part of a research project. The research project is called Ruling Passions, and it's exploring the complexity of what are often called autistic people's special interest. I'm autistic, and I would certainly, for me, I would identify as having what might be called special interests, and that's where I think my interest in special interest comes. I think special interest has become a special interest of mine in itself. But I'm using this term over and over, special interest, and what are often called special interests. So the first question really is, what do you make of that term? What do you think of that term? Um, are you okay with that term? I know it's kind of rooted in, again, what you might refer to as the pathology paradigm because of its origins, but special interests, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't like the term because it has this condescending vibe to it, and
Yeah.
it has this uh, it's sort of like special education, or oh,
Mm.
isn't that special? It seems condescending and a little pathologizing, and I don't think it's accurate. I think it's a little misleading because well, I'll say in defense of the term special interests first, to be fair about this, it's a step up because if you look at the DSM criteria for autism, it talks about narrow and restricted interests,
Yeah,
and that's much worse,
yeah, yeah.
much more judgmental and pathologizing. And so, special interests, I think I would say, is a step up from that, but it's not all the way there yet. And I actually really love the title of this project of yours. I love ruling passions. I think that's a much better term. I really love that, and hope that it ruling passions spreads. I mean, that's kind of what these feel like to me. And I'll say that, the one of my objections to the term special interest is I think that strong interests are part of the human experience, and autistic people may have unusual ones. But if I look at a neurotypical, like really hardcore sports fan, for
Hmm.
instance, that's as intense an interest and a passion as any interest I've had as an autistic person. I mean, people who will riot over football games, that's a very intense, passionate interest there, wearing the gear, the regalia of all their favorite sports teams, and talking about this latest sport event all the time. I mean, there's very rare for me to be that passionately interested in something, and that's a very common thing in the non-autistic world. There are autistic sport fans as well. So so I think it's more that we autistic people maybe uh, gravitate towards more unusual interests and passions, less socially sanctioned, more following the impulse of our own joy, without being as guided by peer pressure about what our interests should be. But even then, in academia, I mean, I have neurotypical academic colleagues who, are experts on some obscure thing, historical Korean foreign policy or something, and they've written, multiple books and academic journal articles on this one topic, and that's just their career, but they're very passionate about it. So yeah, I would say I celebrate this aspect of autistic experience and enjoy it immensely, both my own ruling passions and interests and those of other autistic people. And yet, I think special interests has a way not only of sounding condescending, but also of making it seem like a uniquely autistic experience when it's just our particular take on a more universal and beautiful human experience.
Absolutely, lovely answer. And yeah, I kind of I go backwards and forwards about the term special interest personally because I feel very similarly to you in terms of the kind of pathologizing nature of it. And um, yeah, you talked about it as a universal experience, but then I speak to people as part of this podcast or on the project, and they feel really strongly that they kind of reappropriated that term and they're using it for themselves. But the idea of ruling passions is something I like. The term I'm adopting ruling passions. It comes from a couple of literacy researchers,
Mm.
Barton and Hamilton. I mean, the term's been used in different ways, but it always struck me when I first came across the term as um, making taking account of that idea of these things being they're ruling in a positive way. They're passions. They're things that we really enjoy, particularly as autistic people. But yeah, the similar thing that neurotypical people have, and the term ruling passions isn't linked other than through this project to autism. It is a kind of universal experience.
Well, I love the term. I love how you're exploring it.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I can't take credit for the term, but I will hopefully pursue take it a little bit further. Okay, so thank you for that context. So now we're talking about your passionate interests, your ruling passions. The floor is open really now to you to talk about whatever you want, whatever it is in life that you would call a ruling passion. Some people have started like kind of given a narrative through their life and talked about some of their early passions. For some people, I know that they're very much the same as they were when they were young and in adulthood. So you've talked a little bit about your interests at the beginning. When I say ruling passions, what does it for you?
Really, what it is for me, what immediately comes to mind is my fiction and comics work.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
writing, speculative fiction, and the Weird Luck webcomic. That's what comes to mind as really the project that sparks the most joy in me. And I do notice sometimes something will become an area of interest, but it doesn't necessarily spark the same kind of joy that I would call it a ruling passion. people are surprised often that I find the topic of autism very dull, for instance. Considering how much I've written about it and how much of my academic career I've built on it, it was crucial for me to understand this topic and think through it in service to my own self-understanding and to my community, my autistic fellows, my autistic community. So I have an interest in that sense, but I'm not that, I don't actually read up very much on autism unless there's some really interesting new development in the field, and then I'll check it out. But I'm generally speaking, it's a topic that I've learned enough about that it's kind of dull to me, and it never really excited joy for me. It's just like, oh, this is something I really need to think about as an autistic person who cares about my community. So that's surprising to people that, of course, it's the thing I do get called on to talk about most is autism
absolutely.
and neurodiversity. And it is something that I've become expert on without being terribly excited about. So, and then there's Aikido is much more interesting to me, and that I started training in Aikido when I was 12. And that certainly was a ruling passion for me and has been periodically, but it's also a practice. It's a piece of my life. It's integrated into my life. And so it's a framework through which I view life, and it shaped my embodiment, and, maybe as much as being autistic has shaped my embodiment. But it's not something I talk about and think about all the time either, because it's been so long. I've been doing it for more than 4 decades and teaching it for almost that long.
Yeah.
And so when I'm not actually in the dojo training and teaching, it's not a huge topic in my daily thoughts. My home is not decorated with Aikido related paraphernalia or anything. So yeah, really in terms of, but it was a ruling passion, and that was crucial. It was crucial for me for it to have been a ruling passion through my adolescence, certainly, to get me launched into it, to where it just became a part of my life, like breathing. But yeah, it really is for me, in terms of ruling passions, the fiction and comics writing, and that I wanted to make comics when I was a little kid, and I did in fact draw cartoons all the time when I was in high school. I drew all the time when I was a little kid. I read comics all the time. And that's definitely been a ruling passion since childhood. I mean, even in my very early childhood, I was accumulating like a real encyclopedic knowledge of like 20th century newspaper comic strips and such.
Yeah.
So that was always that whole storytelling medium was always a ruling passion for me. And just having a rich fantasy life I love getting wrapped up in very complex, intricate stories, and then having a rich fantasy life that was similarly complex, in a sense, developing passionate interests in particular characters that either, were in work that I was reading or that I was drawing and writing about. But I started collaborating in high school. When I was 15, I met my friend Andrew Reichart, who remains one of my very closest friends all these years later.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to just be this old and have friendships that have lasted that long. And Andrew and I started collaborating along with some other friends, just started co-writing stories and collaborating on world building. And it it turned into uh, just sort of very elaborate, world construction, interrelated stories and character, long-term arcs of different characters, some of whom he developed, some of whom I developed. And so that turned into a whole body of work that we've come to call the Weird Luck Saga.
Yeah.
And Andrew, and we didn't publish any of this. We weren't ready for publication.
Okay.
We're old, so this was back before there was, like, these days there's like all these online forums where people post fanfic. I mean, my daughter, who's about to turn 16, writes extensive fanfic,
Yeah.
and there's just all of these very active online discussion forums for fanfic. And I mean, she's got thousands of readers, and I can't imagine having thousands of readers at 16. And it's amazing to me that there's that kind of outlet, that kind of venue available now for someone writing. Yeah.
As someone who also grew up without the internet, because I'm that age, I think you can really see how that's changed people's relationships with the kind of culture that they're interested in, or the kind of cultural expressions that are possible these days, compared to certainly when I was younger, and the only kind of access to any kind of external culture I've had was probably through the radio, or going to the in terms of comics and things, going to the magazine shop, to the news agents and staring at things on the shelf. That was like the portal to the other world that people now have in their houses, or in their pockets, or in their rooms.
Right. The comic shop, I remember, I mean, I grew up in central New Jersey, kind of equidistant from New York City and Philadelphia. And there was this whole, like, take the train into Philadelphia once a month to, for various things, but including, like, visit a specific comic shop where, like, there's no good comic shop, in my town. So you take the train into Philadelphia once a month to visit the comic shop and stock up on everything that's come out, or just, read what you can while you're there. So yeah, about a decade ago, after long, many years of doing other things, but continuing to sort of talk about our stories and play with the ideas, and do, like, tabletop role-playing games around them and such. Andrew started actually publishing pieces of his writing around the Weird Luck Saga, and then a short time later, I started doing that as well, writing and publishing some stories. And about 2015, I was like, we need to do a webcomic. And of course, that was a medium that did not exist when we were young. But I was very excited about this idea of, doing comics. It's like in the old days, you write a comic script, and how do you get it published? Self-publishing is a huge endeavor, and getting a publishing company interested is very challenging and such. But webcomics are this whole amazing new do-it-yourself medium, and they have a whole rhythm to them. Being able to tell an ongoing story, and at the same time make each page engaging. So we got very excited about this. I mean, particularly, I was really, like, obnoxiously a driving force there. Like, yeah, we have to do this. But yeah, it was an opportunity for us to actually co-write. And Andrew, the covers for the books that Andrew was self-publishing were done by a wonderful artist named Mike Benowitz, who'd gotten very excited about the story and very interested in doing some kind of graphic novel adaptation. And so, he agreed to collaborate on the webcomic with us, co-create it. And so we have this wonderful collaboration going that's finally, really taken off. this Weird Luck webcomic. But all of my fiction, all of my prose fiction and the comic and, other future comic projects and such are all part of the Weird Luck saga. They're all interconnected. So the same characters move in and out of them at different stages in their lives and story arcs and such. And I just love that. And that is, really a ruling passion for me. And it's kind of my, I do the bulk of the writing, and then, Andrew is very busy doing grad school and such right now. But in terms of the long-term story creation, I'm really enjoying the benefits of the autistic neurocognitive style in this, because it's a ruling passion. It's a really exciting bit of creativity. I'm deeply immersed in creating the story, but also my ability to track the story.
Yeah.
We write the comic well in advance, but I don't keep written notes about any of this stuff. Like, there's a very elaborately developed world and a lot of different intertwined stories and such. And all of that just lives in my head without really any effort on my part. And it's just very joyful having it there and getting to keep dipping into it and building it.
Does that you talked a bit about world building and creating this kind of fictional world that interconnects. Does that world kind of exist in your head before you bring it into being with writing, or do you bring it into being with writing and then it's kind of comes back? I'm just interested in what comes first. Do those thoughts kind of form? Is it all fully formed for you already and you're putting bits out of there, or is it the other way around? How does it work?
It's both. It's an ongoing process, sort of. So a lot of it is in my mind already, and then it gets clarified further through the writing process, and of course through collaboration, because there's wild cards. There's characters that I've developed, and then there's specific characters that Andrew has developed and knows better than me. And so periodically it's like, okay, well, here's a scene where there's some of my characters involved and one of Andrew's characters involved. And so we'll co-write this, and I don't know exactly what Andrew's character is going to do in this situation until he asks. I know how my characters will respond in a given situation. And so sometimes the story takes an interesting turn that way, as I find out, oh, here's this wild card, here's someone, which is great, because I'm one thing I'm not is a control freak. I really like this element of surprise and not knowing everything that's going to happen in advance. Yeah. And so having other collaborators is great. So having Andrew's collaboration in the writing that's always informing me, because he'll come up with ideas that I totally did not expect, or he'll have a character do something I didn't expect, and that will take the story in a new direction. My own characters surprise me, which I love. I think, to me, that's a sign that the characters really have life. That sometimes, until I'm writing a character in a situation, whether in a comic or just in prose fiction, I don't know what the character is going to do. I have an idea of how the story is going to go, but then it turns out the character wants to do something else. And being true to the character, I think, is crucial to writing good stories. And so I get surprised by where a story goes, because, oh, this character is doing this now. And that's what feels true to the character. And I did not expect that until I started writing, the character's dialogue or the character's reaction. Very much a character-driven writer. And then there's the collaboration with Mike Benowitz, our co-creator, who does the art for the comic. And that's a whole other really exciting element to it, because I do have scenes in my mind. I have scenes in my mind, like I just wrote a chapter of script for the webcomic. We write way ahead because it's much faster to write a page of a comic than to draw a page of a comic, and especially if you've seen the art for Weird Luck. It's full color and very elaborate, and that is not the kind of thing that one does fast. So the story is written about 2 or 3 years ahead of it being drawn.
Okay.
And so which is has its own exciting, like, uh strange thing of, like, here I am sharing the latest page with readers, and I know what's happening,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
3 years down the line, and the readers don't, and I have to, like, you gotta keep a lid on the spoilers. But yeah, I just finished writing this chapter that I'd had in my mind for probably 5 years or something,
Okay.
and it did not go exactly like I expected. Once I started writing it, there were shifts. Oh wow, this is a surprise! I did not expect it to get this deep here, and there are the characters do surprise me once I start writing, but I knew the gist of the scene, and there are scenes that I'm, like, looking forward to writing down the road and such. I know the overall long-term plot, in a big way. And there's still room for surprises. What I don't know is how it's going to look when Mike draws it.
Yeah.
And so I may have to pick this story pictured in my mind, but Mike always surprises me with his art. It always surprises me how good it is, because no matter how good it is, he keeps getting better with practice. And so that always surprises me. Oh wow, this is amazing! But also that shapes my storytelling choices, because I see the art and it's like, the the look of the city where the comic takes place is very much in Mike's hands,
Yeah.
and that Andrew and I, as the writers, do not micromanage that at all. We really uh, then there's this funny thing with the character design that we do, where some characters I've been working with, in my head or in prose fiction for a long time, and I have a very precise idea of how they look. And so there'll be very extensive back and forth of me describing them, and Mike sends a sketch, and I say, yeah, change this, change this, change this. And there's a very elaborate collaborative character design process. And sometimes that's get it closer and closer to the image that I had, because I know exactly what this character looks like, and it has to look this way to suit their personality. And sometimes the character is new, and maybe just a very minor character, and I don't have a strong opinion about how they look. And Mike comes up with something, and I'm like, wow, that is so cool. And it makes me want to write more about this character.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
now
yeah.
this is going to be a more important character, because I love how you drew the character. So there's that happening, and there's just, oh yeah, like, something about the way he draws this scene inspires me, teaches me something new about the characters or about the setting. The questions he asks push Andrew and I to do to fill in more details of the world. Yeah, it's a beautiful collaboration, and I love my solo fiction writing in the same world. But I do love this collaboration, and the way that it adds more complexity and more surprise to the process.
Yeah, it sounds like from the very beginning you've been open to collaborating with people, and you
Mm-hmm.
talked about working very early on with Andrew, and it really sounds like it kind of brings a stimulus to you as well, that it gives you a different direction. It helps you develop your ideas in a way that wouldn't happen without those other people. Um,
Yes.
and I think that's the beauty of collaboration with people. It's the beauty of collaborating with people who get something, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Who are on a similar wavelength, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't do this with just anyone. It's
Yeah,
very, Andrew and I had this creative, synergy from the beginning, right from the start. And I was just very fortunate to to find Mike, and to find someone who was also, with whom we also had this creative chemistry, and really bringing in a third collaborator into the world building, who is contributing from a very different angle, with his art and the particular style he brought. It's just uh, um, it's such a rich and complex process of creative synergy that produces this. And yeah, I love it, and I think that that's key for me is uh, the process of being surprised. And on the one hand, I'm a very detail oriented
Yeah.
creator, writer, very detail oriented, and um, a long-term planner in terms of long-term story plot. Uh, so there's a strong element of uh, getting all the details and guiding them, and being maintaining the artistic integrity and writing it as well as I can, and detailed refinements. And on the other hand, again, the whole control freak thing doesn't appeal to me. I really need spontaneity and surprise in my creative life. And I think what happens, I see, unfortunately, a lot of autistic, there's a lot of amazing autistic creativity out there, but a lot of autistic people uh, get scared of spontaneity. They've had, uh, I mean, routine and stability and predictability is valuable when you're trying to navigate a very complicated, intense sensory experience like autistic people have.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think that autistic people get, uh, destabilized by surprises early in their lives, and it creates an association maybe between unpredictability and anxiety. And so they get a lot of anxiety, and so there's a lot of wanting everything very carefully scripted. I have always been a lover of spontaneity, and some of that may be decades of aikido training, which is very much an art of spontaneity, because it's very much about synergy and responsiveness to a partner. What isn't memorizing forms of movement, one is responding spontaneously to a partner one's in contact with. I've years and years of Zen practice, and so there's really this openness to spontaneity that's a crucial part of my creativity and my creative process. And I feel like the joy of the creativity dies if I plot everything too tightly, and if I control everything too tightly. And so there's got to be that spontaneous synergy of collaboration, both with Andrew and Mike and whoever else I collaborate with, and also with the characters of, I gotta know when to let go of my preconceptions about the story and let the character drive.
Yeah. Do you talked about being known for your work around autism, and then we've talked a lot about comics and other passionate interests. What do you have how structured is your life around work and your life around your creativity? Do you spend a lot of your day thinking about your comics and your next moves for your characters and that kind of thing, or do you kind of compartmentalize these different aspects of your life?
I do spend a lot of my time. It is that, and that's where I think of it as a ruling passion in a way that, say, autism isn't, because it's like somebody asked me a question, an autism related question. I have to teach a course on it, give a
Yeah.
lecture on it, get interviews about it. Well, of course, it's right in the forefront of my mind. But when I'm walking around, like going about my daily business, and my mind has space to wander, where it wanders to is the stories I'm working on, or the comic, and what's next in the story, and you know this sort of ongoing engagement with the characters and scenes and stories that I want to write. That's more where my mind goes. And so in terms of structure of my life, I mean, I lead a pretty quiet life. It's not that I set out to rigidly structure it, just that I rarely have occasion to go anywhere. teaching online these days, and I go to the aikido dojo to teach and train at specific times, multiple times a week. But in terms of structure, I mean, I hike every day. I live sort of at the foot of the Berkeley Hills. This town of Berkeley, across the San Francisco Bay from San Francisco. It's like to the west of my home, everything slopes downward to the bay, and to the east it goes up into the hills. And so I walk up into the hills every day, do about 60 minutes to an hour to 2 hours, something like that, of just hiking up in the hills for exercise and fresh air, sometimes alone, sometimes with my spouse. And then I'm exercising periodically throughout the day. And I like to keep in motion. And since all of my work involves being at a desk, at a computer,
Same, yeah.
I work a lot of exercise breaks into that. And when I'm out walking, or when I'm running on an elliptical machine, something like that, always, just in the shower or whatever, there's always story happening with the mind. I'm always engaged with, like, what's the story I'm working on, or future stories I want to work on. So that's sort of where my mind goes to play, without me really trying. Like, I rarely try to steer it, but that's where it's the ruling passion, that, like, my mind naturally goes there, and it's just sort of a happy place to be whenever there's space for mental wandering.
Yeah, I think that was the assumption I was making with that question. I think that this was occupying a fairly significant part of your life, but not necessarily the evening or at weekends. This is something that kind of is ongoing. You're carrying these stories with you and developing them as you're doing other things.
Yes.
In terms of you've talked about your writing, you've talked about your comics. Is there a piece of writing, or a comic, or a page, or an aspect of your creative work that you're most proud of? Is there a part of your world that you've created, a character, or a book, or a chapter, or a page that you can point to as the best of your kind of creative endeavors so far? Or is that too simple? Is that to kind of atomize it too much?
It might atomize it too much, just because what I think is most exciting about it and most interesting about it is the way that it all fits together. Is the fact that the Weird Luck webcomic is a very long plot that's just getting started. It's very elaborate, and it's just starting to lay groundwork for it. And it ties in with stories, the prose fiction stories I've written. There aren't very many of them yet, and the prose fiction stories that Andrew has written, and the fact that it all ties together such that it's like a different experience. Read the comic stands alone, each story stands alone, but the more of the pieces you've read, the more the richer the experience is. There's like, oh wow, okay, my experience as this character in the comic is richer because I read this story that gives a bit of their backstory that's not apparent in the comic, but here it is. Wow. Or the experience is different. Like, oh, my experience of reading this piece is different because I read this piece first. And then if you read, what order you read it in changes the experience you have of it. So I love how it all hangs together, and that and I think we'll see more of that as more pieces are written and as the comic goes on, because of course it unfolds slowly because of the limitations of it takes a long time to draw a page that good. But so yeah, I'm really proud of the way the whole thing hangs together, and in a sense, in terms of uh you know, in terms of what's really representative, I mean, the web comic kind of to me is the flagship
Yeah.
of it all. At the same time, the parts of the comic that I'm most excited about have not been drawn yet. No one's seen them yet. You know, I mean, me and Andrew and Mike have seen the scripts, and so it's like, okay, and you know, this this spring, the next chapter of the comic will launch. You know, Mike is drawing it right now, uh, uh, and I'm super excited about people seeing that. I kind of that's where I'm at. It's like, okay, you want to see like the best thing that like most represents my creativity. Well, it's being drawn right now. You'll see it
Yeah,
next
yeah, yeah,
year, you
yeah.
know. And by the time it's coming out, I'll be like, oh well, the best thing is yet to come.
Yeah.
That's I've written it, and you'll see it. You know, in 2 years, you'll see it when it's drawn. So, but um, I just did. Though I will say, I just had a new prose story come out. Andrew edited a little anthology called Weird Luck Tales 8.
Hmm.
He published 7 issues of a zine over time. Like this is little limited edition paper zine that was mostly just his short stories called Weird Luck Tales. And he just decided somehow that number 8 would be a whole book with uh, stories that aren't related to our weird luck writing at all. Mostly, they're just stories by authors in the weird fiction genre who he
Okay.
loves. So, you know, there's 7 stories by short stories by some really good, very accomplished authors in there. Some people who are kind of well known in the weird fiction, horror, fantasy genre, um, and uh, and then the final story in the collection is my novelette. Like it's like almost novella length. It almost could be its own little book.
Yeah.
So there's a new novelette called Ruiz and the Echo Hotel. That's a piece of the Weird Luck saga. Um, that and I'm really thrilled with that. That was a very hard, long story to write, and I'm thrilled with it. And it's also the first one that's like erotic, which is interesting.
Okay.
That I'm um, I mean, I haven't started the process of physical gender transition yet. I've been out as trans for 4 years or so now,
Yeah, yeah.
and as a trans lesbian, and kind of had these uh, time to explore like how my own wonderful marriage has shifted with my shift in my sense of my gender getting more overt about being femme and being in oh, this is a lesbian marriage, and that which has vastly improved the marriage and was already great, but it works even better as a lesbian marriage anyway. So it's like, okay, uh uh this was my first time working a lesbian romance and erotica into my fiction, and it's yeah, um, it was a big that was a big step for me. That
Mm.
was a big like sort of there's a difference between coming out in my author bio versus coming out in terms of what I write. It gets very
Creative writing.
personal,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So that was a big step, and I was really thrilled with how it came out to be writing like kinky lesbian erotica in something that's actually a piece of the whole Weird Luck saga. A crucial piece of the overall story arc. So that yeah, so that so right now, yeah, that's the thing that's out right now, that's out in the world already, that I'm most thrilled with.
And would that be a good starting point for people interested in kind of getting into the world that's
I
come
would
from your
say,
collaborations?
honestly, I would say the best place to start is just start reading the webcomic.
Comic. Yeah.
I think I think read the Weird Luck webcomic, because it's there online. It's free. There's not very much of it yet, but
Yeah.
there's 4 chapters of comic, and right now we're just running an old story that Andrew and Mike collaborated on before the comic, just sort of, spending a few months while Mike draws the next chapter of the comic. But the I think it's a fun place to start there, and then to back up and read some of the prose stories, which are backstory.
Yeah.
And there's even there's an FAQ page on the website, on the webcomic site at weirdluck.net, and that actually tells there's one of the FAQ bits is about how the prose stories relate to the comic. And so it actually talks about like where it happens in relation to the timeline, like how long before the comic does this story take place, and how long before the comic does this story take place. So I think that's a really fun reference point for people that want to go back and delve into the stories and be like, oh, this is backstory from like, a dozen years before the comic.
Yeah. What sort of, you've talked a little bit there about kind of real life experiences influencing this world that you're creating. Are there any kind of key influences in terms of literature or comics that you really feel that you're drawing on, or things that you liked at the beginning that really got you into this form of text creation?
Well, I mean, I just love comics in general as a medium, I would say, for storytelling. I would say, and picked up a lot of influences over time, but there's an indie comics artist named Matt Howarth, who is not very well known. He's got this sort of long-term, cult following, but he was an indie comics artist from way back. Like he was doing stuff for Heavy Metal magazine back in the late 70s, and
Yeah.
just like kind of all through the 80s when I was a teenager. He was doing these like indie or small press comics, and he's still working away, doing most of his stuff in published entirely in digital form these days. But he's a total like independent, eccentric, very possibly autistic for all I know. I really get that vibe from him, and his creativity is great and very driven by his passion for interesting electronic music.
Oh wow. Okay,
Like
cool.
music, he draws a lot of music for inspiration. Um, but Howarth had this whole world that he built, he had multiple comics taking place, multiple comic stories over time taking place in this world, centered around a city called Bugtown, where the people who were born in Bugtown could shift between alternate realities. They could just shift themselves out of one reality into another alternate universe, and there's multiple, potentially infinite alternate timelines, alternate realities,
Yeah.
and these people can shift between them. And what is the effect of that on the psyche, and on if so many people have this particular ability, and some people can use it more skillfully than others, and what's sort of it sounds fabulous, but the city is this like complete dystopian wreck, because it's of the level of chaos that creates. Very, very interesting, and very fun, and he was and Howard's work certainly back in the 80s was very like psychedelic, clearly influenced by lots of psychedelic drug use,
Yeah.
of lots of blood and violence, and yeah, very fun stuff in a very distinctive style. But anyway, Andrew and I were reading that. We were big fans of Howard's work in the 80s when we were doing lots of psychedelic drugs and starting our story collaboration. And so that was a big influence. You can, I almost feel like, because we're writing a story that takes place, in a city where reality is porous, and there are alternate people who travel between alternate realities, and not necessarily at will, but they have magic or technology that can shift them between alternate realities, and other people trying to police traffic between realities. There's definitely, and the style is so different what we do, but there's definitely, the Howard influence is definitely there. I always feel like there's a big chunk of it that's definitely a tribute to, like, this is how we were shaped by Howard's work when we were, young teenage acid heads. And so yeah, that influence is still, anyone familiar with Howard's work can probably see the influence there. And of course, Mike draws in a completely different style, so it looks very different, but yeah, so that would I would say be the central one there.
That's wonderful. I'm going to do some Googling after this, and I'll put some links up, obviously, to your work, but to some of that as well. We're just going over an hour at the moment, so it's probably time to start wrapping up. Before we do, is there anything on this topic that I've not asked about, or anything you were thinking you might talk about that we've not covered?
Not really, no, it feels like, if you kept asking things, I would just keep on talking, because obviously I love this topic. It is a ruling passion, and so there's no end to what I can say about it. But I also feel like we've covered a lot, and I really hope that listeners will check out the comic, and then maybe, again, there's on the Weird Luck webcomic website at weirdluck.net, there is that, like, there's a books page where you can see where you can find the books that have some Weird Luck prose stories in them and such. But definitely, hey, it's free to check out the comic, so I
Absolutely
hope everyone will.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I've obviously read. I haven't read the whole thing, but I'm going to go back to it, and it looks just wonderful. We'll put all the links up to that kind of thing, and hopefully there'll be some more readers coming soon. But it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for spending the time.
Thank you, Chris.
It's really interesting it's always really interesting to hear about people through the things that they're interested in, and
yes,
this has been absolutely the same. That it's great to learn about you through some of the things you're really passionate about. So thank you for spending the time. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chris. Wonderful talking to you.